Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our live event this morning. We're going to be talking about moonlight, streetlights, and sea turtles today with Dr. Tom McConnell from Ball State's Department of Biology. And this presentation is a part of the Your Universe series, where we explore a different astronomical object every week. And this week, we've been talking about Earth and our moon. And typically we do these types of presentations inside of our planetarium where we have amazing technology that helps recreate the night sky. And it does so in amazing accuracy, and you can see things as if you were in the darkest site on Earth. And you could see things like a cloudy, hazy band of light going across the planetarium dome. This is a real picture of it, and that is, of course, our Milky Way galaxy. Whereas really everything we see, or most everything we see in the night sky, is a part of our galaxy, but the band where we see most of the stars that make up our galaxy are in that bright area in the center here. And we try to do this in a realistic way inside the planetarium because unfortunately here in Muncie and a lot of places on Earth, we have light pollution. There's light from streetlights, businesses, houses, and more that make it so that we can see our surroundings better at night, but it limits our view of the sky by a lot. And this impacts scientists, it impacts observational astronomers, and it affects a lot more, which is why we gather some science about this. We gather data about it. And this data set here is showing just how much light pollution is in certain areas of the globe, certain regions of our world. The black areas here and dark grays and blues are areas that are pretty good. They have low light pollution. So the black areas show a sky that is considered pristine, what you would see without any light pollution, but the oranges, the reds especially, and even the yellows here are where people don't really experience conditions where we can see the Milky Way, that band of light going across our night sky at all. So light pollution affects a lot more than just observing the sky. It actually affects other things too. And why are scientists so interested in gathering data about it? How does it affect things on Earth as well as our views of the sky? Well, for a number of reasons, but for this, I'm going to turn it over to our guest speaker, who is one of my favorite people at Ball State, Dr. McConnell, to explain why. So let me stop sharing my video and I'll turn it over to Tom here.
All right, let me play some slides that we'll be talking about. Thanks, Dana. I also want to thank Rachel for helping out with our presentation here today. This is a new thing for me doing the virtual presentations, but I'm really excited to share some information about the impact of moonlight and starlight and human-produced light on sea turtles. As Dana mentioned, I'm in the Department of Biology. I teach mostly science education courses. And what I'm going to be sharing with you today is related very directly to a project I work on to produce books about wildlife conservation called Conservation Tales. And we're going to focus on one of the volumes of the book called Conservation Tales Sea Turtles. And the photo you're looking at right now shows the team that went with me for some time in Florida to research 3 different topics for books, including sea turtles. And during the presentation, you're going to see some artwork produced by the students from the School of Art who helped illustrate the book, some photos from our team photographer, and a story developed by an educator who helped with the project, as well as information we're getting from Mote Marine Laboratory, a facility in Sarasota, Florida that does research and conservation work, rescue and rehab of sea turtles. So while I'm not a sea turtle expert, the information I'm sharing with you comes from a group of very highly respected sea turtle experts. So that's where our information comes from. I also want to start with a couple of myths and facts that a lot of people have about sea turtles. As we do the presentation, If you have questions, feel free to type in on the chat message or leave a message, and either Dana or Rachel will help get that information to me. And I don't mind answering questions as we go along. We'll also have a question and answer period at the end where you can ask other questions. A lot of people have heard that sea turtles nest during full moon phases. As it turns out, most of the sea turtle experts get phone calls when there's going to be a supermoon asking if that means there will be a lot more sea turtles coming to shore to nest. And as it turns out, this is a myth. Adult sea turtles do not base when or where they nest based on phases of the moon. A lot of times it's easier to find them when they're doing this if there's a full moon because it's easier to see. But sea turtles have been proven to nest at any time of the month, any phase of the moon. They typically nest between April 1st and Halloween, but the phase of the moon doesn't seem to affect them. Another concept that you may have heard of before is that baby sea turtles depend on moonlight to find their way to the ocean. And that is actually a scientific fact. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through today's presentation to let you know why moonlight is so important and why human activity can influence sea turtle hatching. Before we get too far along, I want to share a little bit of information about sea turtle biology because it impacts part of the story. When baby sea turtles hatch, they find their way to the ocean and they start feeding. And for most sea turtles, they never come back to shore. The only time a sea turtle comes back to land after that first entry into the ocean is if it's a female that's getting ready to lay eggs. The males spend their entire life swimming around in the ocean, and even the adult females, they don't come back for quite some time. Typically, a sea turtle does not become mature and ready to breed until they're between 30 and 40 years old. So they have a long lifespan of swimming around the ocean, feeding on things like jellyfish and squid, lobsters and crab. The one in the upper left is the loggerhead sea turtle, and it feeds mostly on shellfish. The ones at the bottom are a hawksbill turtle and a green sea turtle. They eat things like squid and jellyfish until they reach maturity at that 30 to 40-year-old age range. And then they switch completely to eating plants, which is kind of a weird fact. Green sea turtles are called green sea turtles because once they start eating plants, the fat tissue in their body turns green. When they reach maturity, they will breed, and then the females will come to shore and start laying eggs. When they come to shore, there's that season I mentioned earlier, usually starting around April 1st, and they nest up through Halloween. Usually the last babies are hatching around Halloween. And they come to the same shore where they were hatched some 30 years beforehand. In terms of how they find that, we think it has something to do with scent, something to do with magnetism, something to do maybe with patterns in the stars. So they do use starlight and moonlight to navigate, but we don't really understand how they find their way back to the exact same shore. The female will crawl up through the sand, which for an animal like a sea turtle, they're not adapted for walking on land at all. It's a difficult, very exhausting process. She will crawl up onto the shore, dig a hole in the sand with her back flippers, and that hole will be almost 3 feet deep. They dig quite a deep hole. They lay the eggs, they cover them up, head back into the ocean and feed for a couple of days, and they come back to shore again, lay another nest full of eggs. Typically, an adult female sea turtle will lay anywhere from 3 to 6 nests in a season. Once she's done laying eggs that season, she heads off to the ocean to rest, to feed, hang out in the Caribbean where it's nice and warm, lots of food, and they will stay there for years before they breed again. They might only, they know some turtles that will breed every 2 or 3 years, but most of them will breed every 4 or 5 years and then come back to shore to lay eggs. It takes that long for her to build up enough stored energy to survive the process of hauling herself up on the beach a few times, laying the eggs, and crawling back out to the ocean. Those eggs sit in the ground. The picture in the kind of in the middle of the page is an illustration that shows what the shape of a sea turtle nest is. Those eggs will sit under the sand for about 60 days. When they hatch, those eggs, which are about the size of a ping pong ball and almost shaped exactly like a ping pong ball. In fact, most museums, if they build a model of a sea turtle nest, they use ping pong balls. The eggs will hatch. The babies have to crawl up through the sand. They get up near the surface and they sit and wait until the temperature and moonlight are just right. They might peek out of the sand a little bit. And when they see some moonlight and it's dark outside, they start to hatch. They have to, yes.
Really quick, we have a question of, and I'm not sure if you're going to get to this, but where do they live? Like, where is this happening, and where do they hang out?
The sea turtles that we'll be talking about, I'm going to talk mostly about species found in the U.S. They can be found anywhere from around the Gulf of Mexico, the coast of Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, all along the Florida Gulf Coast, and then up the Atlantic coast all the way up into the Carolinas and even Virginia. We've heard stories that sometimes they'll nest as far north as New Jersey, but typically they're going to be found usually in warmer waters. You'll find sea turtles that will also nest in similar kinds of habitats all around the world. And some of the sea turtles that might be found hatching here in the United States could find their way to anywhere in the Caribbean or even along the coast of Africa at some point in their life. They can travel quite a distance. Good question, thank you. Okay. When those eggs hatch, like I said, they crawl up near the surface and then they start to emerge. The picture on the left is a model from a museum, and they don't all merge at exactly the same time, but they should hatch within about a 2-day period. And they all crawl up to the surface. Most of them are going to hatch that first night, and they start heading for the ocean. And these pictures are kind of deceiving. You notice these pictures are happening in the daytime, and I've been talking about moonlight and stars. These are pictures of the stragglers that were late in getting out of the nest. Typically, they will hatch in the middle of the night, usually fairly close to midnight, and the pictures that you take of that first hatch will look more like this. This is taken with a night vision camera. In places where sea turtles hatch here in the United States, you are not allowed to go out with bright lights and observe the hatching. They want people to stay away from them as much as possible and let them do their thing naturally. So scientists that observe them use special night vision cameras or filters that they'll put on flashlights that we'll talk about later. This is when the role of the moon becomes important. And I like this picture because it kind of shows what baby sea turtles are looking for. They're not so much looking at the moon, they're looking at the light reflected from the moon off of the surface of the ocean. Stars that twinkle produce some light, the moon produces some light, and they are programmed inherently when they first hatch and crawl up through the sand to head towards the biggest, brightest light they can see. Ideally, if these are happening in a natural habitat, this is going to happen to be the moon. So they head straight for that light. There's a lot of things that could happen to them between the time they hatch and the time they reach the water. A lot of predators will hang out, things like raccoons and coyotes and crabs and seabirds will be in that area trying to catch these babies because they're small, they're vulnerable, and they're good to eat. But the ones that make it to the shore, they also have predators to watch out for, but they're trying to get to the water as soon as possible. The reason that's important is that the baby sea turtle that's about this big around has been living on the yolk inside the egg for 60 days. That food is used up, and they need to start finding food soon enough that they don't run out of energy. If they happen to go the wrong direction, they're not going to reach the water before they starve to death. So that's a really important factor for sea turtle survival. And we know that sea turtles will follow just about any bright light. The picture on the left is a scientist showing what happens if you shine a flashlight at them. All of these baby sea turtles basically followed the light and came up to his feet. The other picture shows a baby sea turtle trying to cross the road next to the beach, traveling towards a building that has a spotlight or security light or street light sitting outside. So if they can't see sunlight or moonlight and starlight reflecting off of the water, they're going to travel towards the brightest light they can find. And when we talk about light pollution, it makes it hard for those sea turtles to find their way to the water. We also know that there's some research that's happening. This is from Mote Marine. Some of their researchers are doing studies with captive sea turtles that cannot be released into the wild because of injuries. And they're discovering that they can see certain colors better than others. You can see colored targets that this researcher is showing. They've trained the sea turtles to travel to the certain color target in order to get its food. They've also tested what kind of sounds they can hear or not hear, and how they react to different kinds of sounds and light. And through that research, we'll see in a little bit that they've discovered ways to help prevent some of the light pollution problems we're going to talk about. This is a picture that kind of shows what we mean by the light pollution. If you go to a coastal area anywhere in the warmer parts of the United States, like I said, anywhere from Texas on around the Florida Gulf coast all the way up to Virginia along the Atlantic coast, you're going to find a lot of cities and a lot of housing additions and neighborhoods and parks where there are a lot of people. And these people have street lights and lights in their homes, lights on the walkways along the beaches at night. And when sea turtles hatch in these areas, there's a lot of interference that makes it hard to see the moon, hard to see the stars, and really easy for those baby sea turtles to head for the wrong direction. You'll see a lot of the beach bars. Most of the year will have lights outside with a patio area. You'll also find most of the hotels will have lights down on the beach in case people want to hang out on the beach in the evenings. And a lot of these are the same places where sea turtles come up to nest. Okay, so that's the light we want to try to avoid having in an area where sea turtles nest because it can interfere with the movement of those babies. This is a picture from space that shows the Florida area. And again, anywhere along the coast of Florida and also north into Virginia area and west over to Texas, you can see that's where the concentration of people are. And at night, there are a lot of different lights. It makes it hard for humans to see the stars and moon, makes it just as hard for baby sea turtles. And again, the picture down in the lower right shows sea turtles that are heading across a street to the wrong direction. And chances are most of those baby sea turtles will not survive the night if they go the wrong direction. Because sea turtles that we're talking about, every sea turtle found in the United States is either listed as threatened or endangered. Two of them, the hawksbill turtle and Kemp's Ridley turtle, are critically endangered. There are very, very few of them left anywhere in the world, and losing a batch of babies because they've traveled across the street towards a street light is very, very costly for that species, and we'd like to try to prevent that. So I want to talk about some of the conservation actions that help protect sea turtles, some of which directly relate to this story about what's going on with moonlight and starlight and streetlights. Okay, one of the tasks that scientists do is to help protect the nests. The team that we met at Mote Marine from April 1st to October 31st, they send volunteer groups and some of their staff out every day along a 30-mile stretch of beach to look for brand new sea turtle nests. If they see tracks from the sea turtle crawling up through the sand that left a nest and then crawled back to the ocean, and I'm going to go back a few slides to show you what I'm talking about. The picture on the lower left shows a brand new sea turtle nest. You can see a track that comes up from the beach on the left, a place where the sea turtle dug a hole, and then it crawls back into the ocean. It does that all in one night. That's the signs that these volunteers look for on the beach. They'll walk the beach. They have a suitcase or a backpack full of some marking tapes and posts for signs. And if I can get to the right slide. And they mark where the nest is and put up warning signs. Here in the United States, in most areas, because sea turtles are protected, these nests try to get anybody who comes along the beach to leave the nest alone. Unfortunately, some people see that nest and they want to know what's in it. They'll start digging and either accidentally or on purpose dig up turtle eggs. There are also predators that will dig up the eggs. So sometimes in some neighborhoods, volunteers will hang out through the night while that 60-day incubation period is going on, protecting the nest. And some places they will tell you what kind of turtle it is. They can actually tell by looking at the tracks in the sand what species of turtle laid the eggs. They put caution tape on it. They'll have signs out alerting people, do not disturb the turtle nests. But they usually don't tell you when they think they're going to hatch. If they found that nest on the first morning, they know that 60 days later, we're going to have a nest full of baby sea turtles hatching. They have codes that they put on the signs to help tell the scientists when do they think it's going to hatch. But the goal is to not let the public know. They would rather not have a crowd of people gathered around that might be using some lights or making noise and disturbing the sea turtles. The ideal goal is to let those babies hatch naturally and all head for the beach. At the same, yes.
We have a question from Christine who asked actually the same question we asked you yesterday when we were going through our run through. And that is, after the picture is taken of the sea turtles going in the wrong direction, can the photographer pick them up and take them to the ocean? And what's the best practice for that?
Ideally, the researchers don't want the general public to pick them up, but researchers, if they see turtles going the wrong way, might be turning some of those turtles loose. In a couple of slides, I'm going to show you about a program that Mote Marine has where they rescue the stragglers that aren't going to make it to the water on their own. But typically, they want a certified rescue facility to be doing that kind of work rather than the general public. Yeah, that is a good question. If you happen to be in an area and you see that happening, you might want to look for a phone number and have one of the sea turtle rescue teams that's probably hanging out on that beach that night anyway, come and have some of their staff come and rescue that baby sea turtle. Another good question. Okay. I've seen sea turtle nests like this along different parts of Florida. I've also seen some in Puerto Rico. I've met some groups in places like Aruba who come to the U.S. to learn how to do sea turtle conservation. These kinds of nest marks and volunteer watch programs are happening all around the Caribbean, and you'll also find them all around the Mediterranean and parts of Africa as well. So it's a very common program right now trying to help sea turtle conservation. There are also programs trying to reduce the light pollution. These are some Facebook images and signs that you will see along communities anywhere from the Carolinas all the way down through Florida and the Gulf Coast. Some of these communities will have a policy that they want homeowners and businesses to shut off the lights at night from May 1st to October 31st. Remember, I mentioned sea turtles will nest around April 1st. It takes 60 days for those babies to hatch, so it'll probably be sometime in May before the first hatchlings start coming out of the sand. I follow Mote Marine pretty closely. They have a large number of sea turtles nesting this season because there aren't very many people on the beach. With the quarantine, it's nice and quiet out there, and that's good for the sea turtles. I haven't seen any alerts of hatchings yet, but it could happen just about any time now. My guess would be around Memorial Day, we'll start seeing the first hatchings. At that time of the year, they encourage neighborhoods to shut off those lights. In some housing or neighborhood associations that live where people live along the beach, they have an agreement among the homeowners that they will shut off any white lights that they have facing towards the beach during that time period. That doesn't mean they have to shut off all the lights. When they first tried that, a lot of people said, well, wait a second, we've got people walking around on the beaches at night. We want to make sure we're safe in our homes. We need to have some kind of a light. So what they do, they found out from researching what lights sea turtles can see. If we use sort of an orange light, you might call it an amber filter, or to me it's a little bit more red than that. If you use colored filters that you can put on the lights, and you can buy them from things like Home Depot and Lowe's in that part of the country, you put those filters on the lights. Sea turtles can't see that when they hatch out. They're not attracted to those lights. The picture on the far left shows one of the street or sidewalks with some the security lights that you might see along the landscaping with orange filters on them. Street lights and the security lights on people's houses, even flashlights that people take out on the beach at that time of the year are supposed to have that orange filter on them. The picture on the bottom right shows a photo of a house with the white lights. This is a view from the beach. The one on the right shows what it looks like if they have the filters on. So it's a before and after image to show what you might see if you go along the beach in Florida this time of year. I've got a son who just recently moved to Florida, and he's told me that there are signs all over town about making sure we're shutting off lights this time of year because of the sea turtle hatching. So the campaign to reduce the light pop pollution is one of the things they work on. This is what I mentioned about the sea turtle if you see one crawling across the street. Moat Marine is one of a handful of facilities that in the last few years has started rescuing stragglers. Because sea turtles are so endangered, every baby they can help survive is really important. In a typical nest, you might have anywhere from 50 to 100 eggs. The hope is that in a normal situation with no human interference, 2 of them are going to survive. That's not a very good survival rate. And when I say survive, I mean survive to be adults that come back to breed again. If we can increase that number, we might be able to save these endangered species that are very, very rare. So Moat Marine goes out after a nest hatches, and they will check every day. And if they start finding stragglers, the ones that hatch late, the ones that go the wrong direction, the ones that might not be as healthy and don't have energy to get to the water, they will rescue them, bring them back to their sea turtle hospital. If you go to Moat Marine in Sarasota, on the other side of that window during nesting season, that you can actually watch them helping take care of baby sea turtles. Their goal is to feed them for a couple of days, and hopefully they'll be strong enough they can take them back to the beach, lay them in the sand at night close to the water, and let them find their way back to the ocean. And you can see that in this photo was taken in February of 2018. So from the 2017 hatching season, they rescued a little over 4,000 sea turtles. Most of those were loggerheads. They had a smaller number of green sea turtles. They did not have any Kemp's Ridley sea turtles that normally nest in that area. That's one of the ones I said is critically endangered. And you can see that 80% of those were released back to the wild. Another question, Dana?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions, and we'll get to some of these at the end. But Shannon wants to know: are there any like hatchling cams that are available for public viewing?
Not that I know of. The places where this happens are usually at the edge of the beach, where putting a cam would either not have enough light for you to see them when they hatch, or they don't want to attract a lot of attention to the fact that the nest is there. So I haven't heard of any sea turtle hatchling cams. That doesn't mean there aren't some out there. So it's an interesting idea. I've yet to see sea turtles hatch myself, and I would love to be there some year when they're hatching and work with one of the volunteer groups. But in the meantime, if Shannon, if you find one of these hatch cams, let me know. Okay. Down at the bottom, it says 69 hatchlings were admitted to the hospital. These were ones that had some health problems that made it impossible to re-release them. A lot of those don't survive very long. The ones that do, if they cannot ever be released back into the wild, they end up being located at some aquarium as part of their exhibits and educational programs. So if you go to an aquarium and see a sea turtle in captivity, it's possible it might be something from a hatchling program like this, that it was unable to be re-released. Okay. Mote Marine also works quite a bit with doing sea turtle rescues. They have people on call. In this picture, you can only see the back of her head with the bun on it, but in the middle picture, one of the people carrying the sea turtle is named Heather. She works in the wildlife rescue program they have, and if she gets a phone call, she gets a couple of her teammates. They head off in a van, and they will either pick up an injured or a sick or a stranded sea turtle or a manatee or a dolphin, sometimes some small whales. They bring them back to the hospital if they can. If it's just tangled and they need to get it loose, they'll turn it loose. But if it needs medical care, they take it back to the hospital. The photo that you see on the far left are sea turtle tanks at Mote Marine. When we were there in 2018, there were somewhere around 30 tanks, and all but 2 of them had sea turtles in them. Some of them are injured because of tanglement with lines. Some of them are struck by boats. The day I was there, I had to wait for a meeting because they had just rescued a green sea turtle who had been hit by a boat and had a really severe injury on its shell, and they had it in doing surgery at the time I first saw them. But other sea turtles there are being rescued because they're sick from swallowing plastics, or because they have a virus that causes tumors to grow on their skin. And if it gets severe enough that it inhibits them, they bring them in, do surgery, remove those, and then nurse the animal back to health and re-release it. The picture in the middle is an animal I met that first day I was there. His name is Mr. Spock. I saw him on Tuesday. On Wednesday, they stuck a GPS radio transmitter on his shell. They used epoxy like you'd use for fixing a dent in a car. And this is a photo of them releasing him on Thursday. And for several months, he was swimming around the Gulf of Mexico, sending satellite signals a couple times a day, and they tracked his movements. There are some sites that on conservationtales.com, there's an activity where you can go look at data from turtles like Mr. Spock and find out how far do they travel, where do they go. Lots of interesting data that you can get from that kind of study. So Mr. Spock's kind of special turtle to me. By the way, he's a loggerhead, and he weighed about 180 pounds when I saw him. He's just a young one. Okay. One of the reasons I mentioned is the plastics. The day I saw the Sea Turtle Hospital, as I was driving back to my hotel, I called my wife and said, we have to change what we do at home. I had been in the hospital looking at what happens to the plastics when they have sea turtles that die or they do surgery and they save them. Each turtle, they make a bag. They put a data table in that talks about where the animal was found, what kind of injury it had, and they keep the plastics that were taken from the stomach of that animal. The image you're looking at is a label from a disposable water bottle, one of those single-use water bottles. They found fishing line, hooks, plastic bags, bottle caps, and they pulled out drawer after drawer after drawer, showing me all of these individual animals that had died from the plastics. And I realized I'm part of the problem. I used a lot of disposable plastic bags and a lot of water bottles. And my wife and I, because of this experience, have actually changed a lot of the things we do. I now keep a reusable water bottle that I carry with me pretty much everywhere I go. When I go to the grocery store, I don't like getting plastic bags. During the quarantine, they don't let me take my own tote bags in there anymore, and quite frankly, I'm a little upset about it. And the plastic bags I do use, I recycle. These are things that everybody here watching this program can do at home that can help sea turtles. And if you live in Indiana like I do, the plastics you put in the landfill, some of them still find their way into the rivers and creeks and end up in the Gulf of Mexico, and they're injuring wildlife. It's not just sea turtles, by the way. Seahorses, manatees, dolphins, fish, a lot of animals, seabirds, things of that sort. So one of my messages from this is, if you're really interested in sea turtles, there are things you can do here in Indiana to help, and this is one of them. Another piece of conservation work they do at Mote Marine, 3 days after a nest hatches, they excavate the nest. They dig down in with their hands and they find any empty shells from the sea turtles. They count how many turtles didn't hatch at all. Sometimes they will find eggs that are rotten. I've been told it's a really nasty smell, but they're wearing rubber gloves and they dig them up. They count how many open eggs that they found with no turtles. Sometimes they find dead baby sea turtles in the hole, and they take all of this data and they keep a database of what's happening in different places so they can start looking for patterns based on what happens with human activity or what kind of weather events might cause problems with sea turtle hatchings. Quite frankly, hurricanes can wash huge waves up that will drown the eggs in a sea turtle nest. Humans can't do anything to control it, but we're trying to understand what the impact of events like that can be on sea turtles. So those are all the different conservation things that I can tell you about right now that relate to sea turtle conservation. And a lot of it has to do with this hatching. And again, those lights that we produce and put along the shoreline, there are things we can do to help reduce our impact on them. But it's not just sea turtles. I want to mention similar problems that we have here in Indiana where I'm at, and if you're somewhere else around the country, not close to the coast. Songbirds are also directly impacted by moon and starlight. And a lot of songbirds, their numbers are declining. Some are endangered, some are just concerning to scientists that their numbers are declining as much as they have been lately. And this is an illustration from our book about cerulean warblers. And our research consultants for this book talked about the fact that cerulean warblers migrate. They start migrating in July. They travel from here in Indiana or New York State or Tennessee, and they go all the way down to Colombia and Ecuador in South America. And when they migrate, they're traveling hundreds, thousands of miles. They only migrate at night. They'll fly through the sky at night. They navigate by the moon and the stars. And if they fly over a big city with a lot of bright lights, a lot of those birds get confused. They fly towards the bright lights. They find out they're down in a city, and they realize that they better stop flying. Normally, during the daytime, they would start looking for food, and if they end up in big cities, when they fly during the daytime, they have a hard time seeing windows. And we're losing lots of songbirds to crashes on windows during migration. That's migration south during the fall and north during the spring. These birds are dying by the thousands. There are studies where in major cities like New York, in a single day, it might be something like 14,000 songbirds dying by crashing into windows. Several cities have programs where they're trying to reduce the light pollution during the bird migration, asking buildings to shut off the lights on skyscrapers at night up in the upper floor windows, or to put window screens up so that it's not shining the light out, reducing the street lights, perhaps using those amber filters to see if that will work. But there are also things you can do to put reflector tape on windows to help birds recognize that that window is a barrier, not a path to freedom. So you can buy bird tape from the garden centers, or if there's a bird feeding store that you might find, there's several companies around the nation that have products like this. You can put these on your store or your home, or to convince your school or a business that you work on that you need to put these on the windows. And again, this is directly related to wildlife that depend on moonlight as the path for their migration. I've got some slides here that talk about different species of sea turtles, but I'm going to jump to this activity first. If you are really interested in learning some more about sea turtles, I hope you'll take a look at our Conservation Tales book about sea turtles. We also have in all of our books some inquiry learning activities that will help you learn more about the science that scientists do who study sea turtles. One of those skills that we've talked about is how do you identify a turtle by looking at it or by looking at its tracks in the sand. This is a free online activity. It's designed to be used by students in elementary and middle school classes, but if you go to this website, anybody can do this. You can learn how to tell the difference between a green turtle, a loggerhead turtle, a Kemp's Ridley, a hawksbill, just by looking at them. So for instance, when I look at this picture, right away I know what to look for to say, oh, that's a loggerhead. When I first went to Mote Marine, I didn't. So I asked questions and they said, here are the things to look for. That's what's on our website activity. There's also a page that helps you learn how the different tracks the adult turtles leave in the sand can tell the researchers what species it is. And both of these have some practice activities, some photos you can take a look at, and then there's a quiz where you can test your skills. So I'd invite you to come take a look at that. Before I open this up to a lot of questions that I want to hear what you're curious about, but I do want to acknowledge my team that helped me produce the Sea Turtle book. Barb Giorgio Boer is a professor in the School of Art here at Ball State. She's the art director. Sarah, Julie, Kendra, Kyra, and Rebecca are students who worked as co-authors, photographers, graphic designers, and the illustrators who created all this artwork you're looking at on my slides. They traveled to Florida with me. We spent a semester. Some of these students worked with me for a couple of years. They did a fantastic job on this book, and they are also helping us spread the word about what we can do to help protect sea turtles. So with that in mind, I'm going to open this up to any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was really amazing. And if you're just joining us, everyone, I'm Dana Thompson, the director of the Brown Planetarium, and I'm joined with our guest, Dr. Tom McConnell from Ball State's Department of Biology. And we've been talking about sea turtles, moonlight, and more for this presentation. And so there's a lot of questions, so let's just jump right in. Sure. Cindy wants to know if the virus that causes tumors that you mentioned before, is that treatable or preventable? Do you know?
Great question. It's not treatable. Well, it's treatable by doing surgery to remove the tumor. It's related to the papillovirus that affects humans, and it's spread the same way. It might be possible to produce a vaccine for it, but trying to catch sea turtles and give them a vaccine is not very practical. The only real problem it causes them is tumors that grow on the skin that themselves are not fatal unless it grows over something like their eye or their mouth and prevents them from being able to find food. So they can do surgery, it removes it, they'll probably grow back. And it turns out that a huge percentage of the population of sea turtles have the virus. It's carried in the ocean, and when they travel through an area that has the virus, it's almost impossible to prevent it. But again, it's not necessarily a terribly serious illness for the sea turtle.
So, when the people who live nearby are asked to turn off their lights or use specific lighting, um, have there been any protests or people who don't want to necessarily do that? And if so, what happens if that's the case?
Um, in some communities, there have been some issues, especially at first. A lot of people in the communities resisted that idea. They saw it as a security problem, and they wanted to make sure that their homes were safe or their businesses. Um, and some people did resist that. In some places, for instance, the Sarasota area actually passed a city ordinance that any home within a certain distance of the beach, any part of the house facing the home had to have the amber filters on any lights at a certain time or they can be fined. Most of the communities that I'm aware of, though, have discovered that sea turtles are a really good tourism draw. There are places in Georgia, for instance, where there are huge parks and sea turtle rescue facilities that are big tourism draws during that hatching season. Um, and it's to the benefit of those communities to protect them. The housing additions, where I told you the housing association has a policy, it's basically because the homeowners got together and said, we want more sea turtles here and we want to do something to help. So we're going to make a requirement that anybody who buys a home has to agree to do this. So
Right.
it's become more of a grassroots movement, and it's not getting a lot of resistance much anymore because people have found good solutions to work around it.
That's great to hear. So, another question is what happens when there's no natural light? So, we know that the moon isn't always in the sky, but there's still light that comes from stars and the Milky Way that can get reflected off of the ocean and lead turtles in that direction. But what if there was maybe some clouds or stormy weather when the hatching is going on? What happens then? Do you know?
Um, I don't know exactly what would happen. I know most sea turtles will hatch when there is moonlight available. I mentioned they hatch and then sit below the sand waiting for the right conditions. That's one of the things that scientists said somehow they're close enough to the surface they can tell when there's light shining. Um, but I think it would be really rare that you'd have a night, even if there's a new moon or the moon's not during the time. I don't think you would see a situation where there's absolutely no light out there. Even with cloud cover, there's going to be light that will reflect off of the clouds and bounce off of the water, and you're going to get some glittering, and that's what the sea turtles are looking for.
Great. So Kevin Gearhart is a longtime fan and first-time video stalker. He loves your book and wants to see one on the okapi, but he wants to also know if climate change has had an effect on the number of successful breedings.
Yeah. Uh, I've known Kevin since we were in 7th grade together. So, Kevin, I figured you might be stalking me today somehow. Kevin's also a big supporter and donor to help support our book. So, thank you, Kevin. Um, Climate change is a problem. One of the things that the people at Moat Marine were telling us about, there are several small islands that are uninhabited around Sarasota Bay that normally have sea turtle nests. Um, this year, they've been doing really well with nesting on those sites, but the previous 2 years, most of the nests that were laid on that site were being destroyed by tides that were higher than normal. As the ocean level is rising, it's flooding the beaches that some of these turtles nest on. And the turtles would come up and lay their nests, and every time there's even a small storm, the waves are washing seawater up and filling up those nests, and it drowns the eggs before they hatch. So the number of sea turtles hatching on those islands has nosedived because of rising sea levels. And that's a problem that we find quite a bit in South Carolina and North Carolina, the Virginia Beach area right now. The places where sea turtles normally would nest are starting to get inundated with rising ocean levels.
Yeah. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your book? People want to know where you can buy physical copies of Conservation Tales, because there's more than just one book, right? There's
Yes.
multiple ones. What they're about and what what does a portion of the profits go towards? Does it go towards
Okay.
conservation groups, stuff like that?
Yeah, the books that we have, the best place to get these is to go to conservationtales.com. We have an e-store. You can buy them online. They're not a digital book at this point. They're only hard copy. They're printed on demand, so we don't keep a huge supply of them on stock. But if you order one, it will be mailed directly to you through Amazon. We have right now 9 books of different, 9 titles of different species. 4 of them are from here in Indiana: cerulean warblers, bats, bees, and salamanders. We have 3 books from the Florida Gulf Coast: sea turtles, manatees, and seahorses. 2 books from Africa, books about elephants and giraffes. And we are getting ready to release probably early June 2 new books about orangutans and tigers, so an Asian series. And we have plans to continue developing about 2 books a year for the next 3 years. There are a few stores that carry them. The Indiana series, for instance, or Midwest series is available at Minnetrista here in Muncie. I am looking for places that want to carry them in gift shops and nature centers. So if you have some place that you would like to carry the books, give them our website address. We have we have wholesale prices for bookstore sellers. We also have teacher discounts. And if schools buy them, an educator discount. And if we do events, outreach events, we've kind of been hit hard this spring because we can't go out and do events right now, but we always have some books on hand to sell that way. The books retail for $14. All of the profit from that goes back into the project to help produce more books and to pay for doing these outreach and educational activities that we do with groups like the United Way and nature centers and educational centers around the state. It's a nonprofit program that we're just trying to pay for doing more work.
That's great, and it's great work, Tom. So
Thank
I
you.
think we're actually running out of time. If you do have a question, you're watching this later, drop it in the chat. We'll try to answer it. And we did share in the chat that there is this citizen science project, globeatnight.org, where you can actually measure and collect data to help scientists understand light pollution. So check that out. Again, that's in the chat. The link to it is in the chat below, but you can also see the information here. And then next week on Friday, the next Friday here at 11 o'clock, we are going to have Dr. Rick Flugeman from the Department of Geology join us, from Ball State's Department of Geology join us to explore the geology of Mars. So we hope that you can join us for that next Friday at 11 a.m. But thank you so much, Tom, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to answer all of your questions and get this interest on these really important causes. So thank you, Tom, and thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you too, Dana.